heart, we move on to Juelz Santana, who has some unique thoughts about the value of the skill of reading.
Hmm.
Needless to say, Juelz Santana thinks that learning how to read is overrated. He thinks that instead of focusing on learning how to read, kids should be learning financial literacy and how to run businesses. He doesn't think that you need to learn how to read in order to be able to do those things. Thus, he
Yeah.
doesn't feel like reading is necessary to be successful in life. So this says Joel Santana claims kids don't need to learn to read. It's no secret that people have a lot of strong feelings when it comes to the topic of education. This includes Joel Santana, who shared his thoughts on the matter during a recent appearance on the No Funny S podcast. According to him, financial literacy should be made a bigger priority than it is now. He even thinks it should take precedence over reading. By the time they get to the ninth grade, they should be learning how to start businesses, but they don't really need to learn how to read. When asked to choose between math and reading, he doubled down. Math, he declared. You can listen to a book on YouTube, you can still obtain the information. You don't have to know how to read. I believe common sense is better than everything. Santana proceeded to call himself a common sense N word and to claim that he'd rather have zero book smarts than lack street smarts. I try to understand people. Like nowadays, you can listen to a book. He continued, also revealing that Robert Greene's The 48 Laws of Power was the last thing he read. That's also a book that I read. Co-host Kenny KP Supreme then argued that reading is essential for understanding contracts, prompting Santana to push back once again. Reading is just when people want to embarrass you and try to play you, or you can't read your contract. Anybody who said you can't read your contract, they didn't read their contract. They had a lawyer read their contract. They just saying it to be funny. This isn't the only controversial take Joel Santana has shared in recent months. Earlier this year, he also weighed in on Cameron and Jim Jones's beef, confirming that it's not something he's willing to condone. Nobody wins when the family feuds, he said, no matter what we're going through behind the scenes. So all relevant links are in the description of this video. Of course, you can click on that YouTube embed to watch that interview and talk about Joel's expressing his thoughts that reading isn't really that important. What did you think about his synopsis there? That one shouldn't learn how to read because it's not that important.
I think he's wrong. All right, I think he's wrong there, and I think that, and this also explains his lyrics. Now, mind you, yeah, I have some songs in the playlist, some old stuff from Santana that I personally think he snapped, but he was more of it explains it explains some of his rhymes. Explains some of his rhymes. Um, I get his point though. I get what he's trying to say. But to me, I think this is a problem of priorities. I think this is a priority issue where he's looking at what can make you the most money. And he believes that if you know your numbers and you work, and have a business and you work on that business and blase splees, then you'll just have money. But the thing that I've realized about reading and the ability to read is that, I don't have any numbers or anything in front of me, but I'm pretty sure there's a strong correlation between reading and certain crime statistics. And I believe there was something out there where there was like either a third grade or something in reading tests or whatever. And by that test, they can determine how many prison beds they're going to need later on. Um, when those kids be, hit of age. And so I don't think that correlation is there because it doesn't eventually end up in being something else. Those people might end up getting into a life of criminality. Now, just because you don't know how to read doesn't mean you're necessarily going to be a criminal. But, my point is, I think that there's something to reading and it's not completely irrelevant as he's trying to make it sound. And so I think it's dangerous rhetoric. And I don't know how many people are going to go for this, outside of people who don't read. you know they're gonna double down on what Santana is saying, like, yeah, he's right. Santana, he made it, he's successful, he doesn't read. But man, if you're gonna be running businesses, let's say you get these kids, learning business practices from ninth grade on, and they actually get into this position where they're actually, that person, when it comes to business, their inability to read could cost them everything. And you relying on other people, other things, in order to educate you on something because you don't want to read, it can pose a problem later. So me personally, I don't think any life skill needs to be overlooked. I don't think any of these things are completely irrelevant. I think that these kids have the capacity to learn how to read and do math and learn how to run a business and. But as I was leading with, is that, where are your priorities? If your priorities aren't involved in trying to elevate yourself and have all the tools that you need to be a successful person later, but your your priorities are involved of how can I make the most money? How can I be the most lit? How can I be the most on? Then yeah, you'll if that's where your priorities are, then you'll throw reading to the wayside because it actually is a skill that requires focus and attention and brain power. So me personally, not a fan of this take. I always had I always thought Juelz was a cool dude, but this is a horrible take, and I can't stand behind this. But what are your thoughts, man, on Juelz Santana saying that, hey, man, reading isn't actually fundamental; it's actually quite unnecessary? What are your thoughts, bro?
Yeah, I'm gonna meet him halfway. I'll meet him halfway. So the general idea that reading is an unnecessary skill, I find completely ridiculous. Um, you drew up the correlation anecdotally between reading and crime statistics. I'm just going to draw the correlation between reading and general comprehension.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you might say other intrinsic basic skills like mathematics are more important than reading. But what you cannot convince me of is the ability to comprehend at an adequate level not being important. And I do think that there is a correlation between the skill of reading and the capacity for comprehension of concepts of varying degrees of complexity, from the simplest thing to the most complex, complicated, concepts that one can learn. There are certain aspects of a person's ability to adequately comprehend sets of information that I believe are correlated with the skill of reading because it activates the same part of the brain that requires you to be able to process information adequately. And I do think that in order to be successful with learning said math skills and running said successful businesses, you have to be able to comprehend information. So to just summarily dismiss reading as something that is essential to me is something that I completely disagree with. Furthermore, his analogy, or not even an analogy, but his example of, you know, people who claim that they read their contracts are just saying that to make fun of you because they didn't even read their contracts. They had somebody else read it for you. Okay, so basically you're just a mule who's setting himself up to get made, who set himself up to get taken advantage of.
Yep.
How does that help you? It reminds me of Chris Rock had the joke about Stevie Wonder because Stevie Wonder's blind. So he was saying Stevie Wonder's blind and he's really rich, but he don't know if he got hundreds of ones in his hand because he can't see anything.
Come on, man.
I'm just saying that was what Chris Rock said, right? Don't know if he got hundreds of ones. So why wouldn't you want to know how to read the contents of your contract if for no other reason than to know for sure that a person who's interpreting a particular document for you isn't misleading you or lying to you in an effort to be able to siphon you for stuff or take advantage of you. How can you verify that that's not the case if you cannot read it for yourself? You're just going to rely on others to read these things for you for the rest of your life into perpetuity. How do you know that what they tell you is on that document, since you can't read, isn't actually something that's wrong and they're saying something that's not true to be able to take advantage of the situation?
Exactly.
So all the way around, the idea that reading isn't important is ridiculous. I think that that's dumb, and I think it's very dangerous rhetoric. Now, here's where I will meet him halfway. The idea that children should be learning financial literacy at an earlier age. I agree with that 100%. I think the capacity to comprehend things like starting businesses, certain basic things when it comes to building, businesses, lines of credit, starting a 501c, creating an LLC, all of these various things, things like business credit and whatnot. Those are things that can be taught to children at a very young age, for sure. And I do think that that is a hole in the education system in this country that is actively exploited every single year that it isn't instituted as a part of the curriculum. But it's purposefully being left out of the curriculum because this country is a capitalistic country. And in capitalism, you need people to be funneled into labor and employment. And the more you teach young people financial literacy and business acumen, and the more you put them on the fast track to entrepreneurism, and the more you put them on the fast track to getting MBAs so that they can create businesses and be in positions of leadership and management, the less you're going to be able to fill in the ranks of employment and labor and servitude. And this country cannot thrive or survive if not for laborers and people who are in the modern day slavery system to feed this system by spending money as consumers.
Mm-hmm.
So, the idea that children need to be taught financial literacy at an earlier age is something that I would agree with. But I also think, and I'm not sure if Juelz thinks about it along those lines, I also think that it's something that's being intentionally left out of curriculums at that delicate stage of development, because the most important thing is to feed cattle into the farm system of employment and consumerism. And the more people that you have on top making the money and creating the opportunities and creating the businesses, the less people you're going to have spending the money on goods and services. And this country needs cattle in order to be able to continue to fund and fuel this capitalistic system. So I understand the spirit of where he's coming from to that extent. Thus, I'm willing to meet him halfway. But the idea that reading isn't important to me is utterly ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody, for the most part, I don't know who would actually disagree with the portion of, you know, kids need to learn financial literacy, but as you mentioned, bro, like, depending on this school system, whether you're going to private schools, charter schools or whatever, man, that it's all a farce if you ask me. They're just big daycare centers. And honestly, me personally, as you say, to make cattle, yeah, they're farms. They're they're what's the word I'm looking for? Indoctrination camps. You know what I'm saying? Like, our whole generation got fed lies. And my college debt is the proof of that. And a lot of people in our generation's college, their debt is also to prove with that. People out here that got degrees, multiple degrees, struggling to find decent income. That's due to lies. And so the school system is predicated on funneling people to be cattle, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, man, as far as like um reading is concerned, because growing up, man, I didn't like reading. I could read. I'd rather watch TV. I'd rather listen to an audiobook, or something, And but this is before the days of audiobook. This is when I actually in school. I would just rather watch TV and whatever. And so, my parents, it was having a hard time, man, with just getting me enthusiastic about reading. So when they took me to the library, they was like, "Hey, don't get that over there." They knew I like basketball and football. So they was like, "Bro, go to the sports section and get those things." So then I got some books, got one on Hakeem Olajuwon. I got one on I forgot what the other one was about, but I got some basketball books and some football books. And I was reading those. And I was reading those books. And then at that point, I was like, "Hey man, I actually like this." And then so it got to the point to where I don't know who told me this or where I came up with it, but it was around that time of, they're giving me this stuff in school that sucks for a reason. Because reading doesn't suck. What they're giving me sucks. So then at that point, I was upset with the school system I really felt like they were trying to make people disinterested in reading because of the stuff that they're giving these kids to read. Everybody learns different, but they have these sanctioned things.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure Juelz was in the same boat where, look, I don't feel like reading this stuff. I don't feel like, reading this thing over here or whatever, whoop-de-whoop. Everything is interesting. Science is interesting. Math is interesting. Just regular literature, all of that stuff is interesting. School would be interesting if they made it interesting. But they don't make it interesting. They want you to check out. Nah, man, when you see these young people, you know what I'm saying? Like, they're complete. They got senioritis in elementary school. I didn't catch that till like 9th grade, bro. And then I'm sure the more years we spent out of school, it went from 9th grade to 7th grade to 6th grade to now these kids don't care about anything, man. And I don't blame them because the stuff that they're teaching them in school is already out. It's outdated.
They're probably giving them the same standardization that they gave us.
It's well, yeah, literally the same, which makes it worse because times have moved so much.
Because it was over 20 years ago. Yeah,
yeah, man. Yeah. It's like, wow, y'all doing that, or they make them do all these extra steps at math that are completely unnecessary. So don't get me started on the school system. So, but the point I'm making here is that Juelz is a person that's been failed by this same system, which is why he doesn't trust it, which is why he thinks that there's other ways to getting it than what they're giving you in school. So I hear his point, but it's dangerous because it's not true. Reading is actually fun. Reading is actually very useful. And it's a skill that, honestly, once you get it developed and it becomes a part of you, it doesn't go anywhere. It's literally riding a bike. But the school system, I believe, it creates anxieties and all kinds of pressures towards reading. If you fall behind 1 year, 2 years, or whatever, it's a snowball effect. And Juelz was probably in that boat. And so he's like, to hell with it. It served me no purpose. And look where I'm at. I guess that's a good thing. And look where I'm at. And, other kids need to do the same. But I'm not for it. He sounds like a person that's been failed by the system. So of course he's going to say something like this. And I would just tell everybody out there, man, that school system, you sending your kid off to school, and not maybe y'all, but people send their kids off to school and they get mad that their kid isn't either developing the right way or whatever. That's not the school's responsibility. That is the parents' responsibility. And the school is literally a daycare center. So, don't expect the schools to educate you, man. And so that's why the reading is what it is. The scores are what they are. The math is what it is. Like, everything's bad, and the reason being is it's intentional. So, yeah, man, I'm sorry, Juelz. I'm sorry you feel that way, man, or anybody else that feels that way. I'm sorry you feel that way. But I can't rock with this. I'm not against any form of education, especially reading.
Yeah. a lot of the stuff that they made us read in high school and middle school, I gained a greater appreciation for as an adult. But I
Right,
think, but as a kid, they got to come up off that stuff. Like, give children things that they would actually want to read. Like, stop
right.
forcing kids to read Mark Twain all day. Like,
I want to
you
hear
know,
about that.
yeah, it's silly, but that's a part of what you're referring to as standardization,
You're right.
which is the problem with education. I can't speak for other countries, but I do in this country. That's the problem with education, is that it's standardized with the intent to meet the needs of as many people as possible. And in an effort to do that, you fail a lot of people to whom it doesn't meet those needs.
Yes.
I would even argue that it fails the majority of kids, because you're going to have that 10% or 15% who are going to be able to thrive in that environment. But by the most part, comprehension is a very selective individual process, and you have to curate it based upon the individual sensibilities of the student. But you can't do that when there's so many people that you have to take care of, and so you standardize everything, and all that ends up happening is that you just create crash outs, and people are, and literally, like, all you end up doing is creating crash outs and funneling the vast majority of the people into perpetual employment, where they'll
Yes.
just be spending, where they will just be spending their money for the rest of their lives. So it is what it is. The education system is definitely one of those sensitive areas, but I think that it's like this by design. I think that it's one, like, people tend to think that it fails a lot of kids because of its inherent inadequacies in the way that it's structured. I don't think those inadequacies are not intentional, is my
Correct.
point. I believe the inadequacies are purposefully instituted and maintained that way,
Yep.
because I think the idea of the education system is to funnel people into the systems of employment and labor, so that they can continue to keep the calibration of capitalism moving via spending all the money that they earn every time they receive their inadequate income, either semi-monthly or every 2 weeks. I think that's the purpose of school at this point. And it's unfortunate, but there is a way to chart a path forward. And I can't just summarily dismiss reading as a skill. I still think that it's necessary and it is fundamental. It just has to be targeted and intentional.
Yeah, I agree, man. So yeah, Santana. Sorry, bruh. Um, I can't stand behind this. But again, he sounds like somebody that was failed by this very system that we're talking about. So of course that's going to be his worldview. And there's a lot of other people that I'm sure that they might not be as loud and as vocal that also agree with his take 100%. And again, those are people that were failed by this system. So but yeah, there's nothing wrong with having skills in life, period. So to say that a skill is unnecessary, you're not gonna be successful in the game of life. So I can't go for that.
Most people are failed by this system. Most
Hmm.
people.
Hmm.
That the I don't know, the 60 to, depending on the source that you're looking at it from, the 70 to 85% of the population that's considered working class were failed by this system. And that's the vast majority of the people. And the 10 to 15% of those who reside above that median level of being working class, those are the individuals who weren't failed by it. And even if you pierce that apart, I'm pretty sure there's a decent percentage of those people who would have been failed by it if they were left up to the mercy of it. They just weren't left up to the mercy of it because they were in an advantageous position, either because they were born into the right family or because they got very lucky at some point and came into some kind of inheritance. I don't know, won the lottery. Something happened along the way which represents an outlier to this particular equation. But beyond that, And beyond being born into an environment in which you're too big to fail because you're born into the right family or something of that nature, everybody's failed by this thing. The 80 to 85% of the world's population that is working class is failed by this. If you are a laborer, an employee, a worker, and you live paycheck to paycheck, you're failed by this system, and that's the vast majority of people.
Yeah, I agree, bro. No objections there, man. Hey, I would shout out Juelz. Normally I would, but I can't shout him out after a take like that, man. So I guess shout out Dipset minus Jim Jones. So
Yeah, I just don't agree with that. I'll be damned if I'm going to rely on someone else reading something to me. Like, how do I know you're not screwing me over by reading something that's not actually there? I can't trust that.
I mean, that's like literally being you're in a whole nother country, and you don't know the language. It's kind of like, and you're depending on whoever's reading the whatever to tell you whatever it is. So you can understand what they're saying, but you can't read anything that they're writing. And then you go, hey, bro, what does this say over here? And it says, oh yeah, you're due $1 million. But the guy says, it says you get about $500. And you go, wow, $500. Wow, I'll take it. And it's like, hey man, you're not, now you're out of $1 million, So it just pays to know. Now, of course, it's English, and I'm pretty sure he can fumble his way around to know that it's actually $1 million. But again, man, when you're dealing with high level stuff, you telling about people having business literacy and having business backgrounds and stuff like that, you're going to be dealing with sharks that can take advantage of the fact that you're not willing to do that. So yeah, not a fan of it, bro. It's a half-baked take, I would say.
Yeah, I'm willing to meet him halfway, but I can't go all the way because that to me is insane. You're literally depending on others to interpret information for you, and
Can't go.
you're just going to get taken advantage of at every point. So
Mhm.
I can't agree with that.